Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2005 comic book film, Batman Begins. Now, before I begin sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Nick for requesting this review, and reviews of the entire Batman trilogy by Christopher Nolan. Now, if there is another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I will try to get to it as soon as I can. Now, Batman Begins is one of those films that I have a conflicted and contentious relationship with. Initially, when the film came out and I saw it in the theater, I liked it. I didn't love the film, but I did find it to be a relatively enjoyable comic book movie and one of the better origin stories that I had seen at the time. Then The Dark Knight came out, and after I finally saw it, after all the hype died down, I wasn't really of the mindset that it was this masterpiece like a lot of other people were at the time. So I went on a message board on IMDb and I decided to start up a conversation talking about that and saying that while I did like Batman Begins and I did find The Dark Knight to be interesting and definitely worthwhile at the time, I still preferred Burton's Batman movies. And to this day, that's still my preferred take on The Dark Knight. And I wound up running into the worst side of the Nolan fan base at that time. All these different users just completely shat down my throat for saying, honestly, a pretty innocuous statement at the time. And they took it personally as if I took a massive fat shit all over their mom's face or all over Nolan's face because they were very defensive over Christopher Nolan. And that led to me going into fuck you mode, which, I mean, you can't blame me. So I'm like, what the fuck? Fuck you. Like, what the fuck is your problem? And so I got in this back and forth, and it was nasty, and it was really awful on both sides, and it made me pretty irritated. And then when I did get around to watching Batman Begins again, as well as the other Christopher Nolan Batman films, I wasn't in the right mindset. I was in the mindset of fuck these Nolanites, these assholes. I'm gonna show them. I'm gonna show them that their film, that their beloved Nolan Batman movies aren't as flawless as they think they are. So I went into watching them at that time with that mindset. So Batman Begins turned into a bout of target practice for me. And I wound up not liking it. And I even remember doing a rant video on it a long time ago. After I became more of a veteran of the internet and dealing with people's bad behavior on the internet and getting the perspective of the entire Nolan Batman fan base as a whole, which isn't bad. I mean, that's the thing. These people at the time, they made the fan base look bad. They made it look like it's just this haven of hate. But that's not really the full picture. And I didn't really see the full picture at the time. And I didn't really try to see the full picture at the time. I was just so blinded by rage. And nowadays, there are friends of mine on Facebook, and there's other people I've interacted with who are big fans of these films, and when I share the fact that I prefer Burton's Batman movies, they're okay with that. They agree to disagree. So I, in turn, decided to revisit Batman Begins and these other Nolan Batman movies, and as a result, I came full circle with Batman Begins, and I liked it again. And I learned to respect and appreciate the aspects of the film that I honestly always did like, but I buried them in favor of these more negative things that I felt about the film because of the mindset that I was in. It's not fair to criticize something, let alone a film, if you're in the mindset of wanting to hate it. So I made that mistake the second time around, but the third time around, I didn't. And I ultimately did like the film. And then when I rewatched it again for the first time in 4K, I still like the movie. I think it's got flaws. I think it could have been a little bit better, which is why in some ways it's honestly a little disappointing for me. But at the end of the day, I still like the film. I don't love Batman Begins. I know there's a lot of people who absolutely adore this film, and I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. I know there's some critics and some people out there who say that this is the pinnacle of the comic book origin story for a movie. I don't agree with that. I personally feel Superman the movie is a better instance of that, or even some of the other comic book films that came out after Begins, like Iron Man. But I still would have to say, even despite this film's issues, it's still a decent enough origin story. I just think the origin story as a whole is not really something that lives up to its full potential. Now, Batman Begins is directed by Christopher Nolan, and at the time, Nolan wasn't really a well-known name. He had done a few things here and there, like he did some dramas, like Insomnia, and I think his directorial debut, and of course he did the film Memento. But it wasn't one of those things where he was this big name in Hollywood yet, and he definitely wasn't to the point where he would have this rabid fan base who would come to his defense after this film's release. Honestly, pretty much after The Dark Knight. That's when the fan base really became enormous and immense. And Nolan is definitely working with a genre of filmmaking that he doesn't have a lot of experience with in this film. And it's very obvious. There's a lot of moments where you can tell that he's not really comfortable with this. He's kind of just treading water. He's just trying to find his own way. And that's fine. But the thing that frustrates me about Nolan's direction in this film is that it's inconsistent mainly because of his own inability to be humble. And what I mean by that is he deliberately decided to not have a second unit directing team, as well as a third unit. He decided not to have any second or third unit directors on the set for this film because he believed that none of them could live up to his vision. None of them could accurately recreate his vision for this movie, which is an incredibly pretentious thing to say. And at the same time, it makes you think that he actually believes that second unit and third unit directors just are freelance artists who just direct whatever the hell they want to, or at the same time are not capable of being on the same level as he is as a filmmaker, which is just so incredibly snobbish when you think about it. I can't think of any film off the top of my head where the second unit and third unit directing was so distracting in terms of the lack of cohesion with the main director. I can't think of that. I can't think of a single one. So what the fuck is Nolan even talking about here? And that's why there are a lot of scenes in this film that look like total amateur hour because of the fact that Nolan refused to allow anyone else to do any other directing for the movie. So that's why you have fight scenes that are inept and are really poorly done because he refused to allow a second unit director who has experience shooting fight sequences shoot the fight scenes. And that is something that definitely is holding this film back for me. Anytime there's a fight scene, it's choppy, there's too much quick cuts, there's too much shaky cam, it's hard to follow what's going on. All the hallmarks, all the earmarks of somebody who doesn't know how to shoot a fight scene are on display in the fight scenes throughout Batman Begins. And the reason for that is because Nolan had zero experience doing that, but he seemed to think that he had enough experience shooting fight scenes that he didn't need a second or third unit team of directors. And I really do like the fact that Nolan wanted to do as much as he possibly could practically and on an actual location. For instance, there's that moment where Ducard is training Bruce on the ice, and he shot that on an actual glacier. And it's a really impressive looking sequence as a result. And then there's these other moments in the film that are quite impressive visually. The moment where Batman is escaping from Arkham with the help of all these bats. It's a great visual, and it's really well shot by Nolan. The sequences where Gotham is spiraling out of control as it's getting overrun by fear gas. Those are also really well shot sequences. The Tumbler scenes, I thought they were really well done for the most part. They had a nice sense of adrenaline and thrills, and just they really matched the intensity and the roughshod, rough and tumble nature of the Tumbler itself. And there are a few other shots here and there where you go, wow, this Christopher Nolan really does show a lot of potential as a director. But then there's some other moments where it looks a little bland, it looks a little amateurish, it looks a little flat, and that's because he just refused to allow anyone else to direct any other portions of this film. And I think that was a huge mistake for a movie that is ultimately the first go around for Nolan when it comes to this kind of filmmaking. He had never done a comic book film before, and he had never done a big blockbuster movie before. So that's why this has this indie feel to it at times. And there are moments where that really does work in the film's favor, but then there's other moments where it absolutely does not. And those really could have been remedied if Nolan just got out of his own way and took his own head out of his own ass. That doesn't mean that it's bad directing. I think he did a good job, but I think it could have been a great job if he decided to collaborate with other directors, other people who have honed their craft in this particular genre of filmmaking. Then you get to the screenplay by Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer. And to me, this whole narrative, this whole script is a tale of two halves. It's like two sides of a coin. One side is ultimately a lot better than the other. And the script is really what prevents this film from being great, to me personally. Because unlike other people, I don't think the first half of the film, which is over an hour long in terms of building up Bruce Wayne's ultimate transformation into Batman, I do not think that it's handled or written that well. There are moments where it works, and it works really well. For instance, I love the way it starts. It's very unique for this kind of film because it's just a day in the life of young Bruce Wayne hanging out with Rachel, and they're spending time with one another and playing in the field, and then he falls into the cave and he has his first encounter with the bats. And then you have a lot of sequences that build up Thomas Wayne as a character. And I will give Nolan and Goyer a lot of credit for those sequences. I love the way that they wrote Thomas Wayne. Instead of Thomas Wayne just being a rich socialite who happens to be Bruce's father, you have more to this character than in any other film that features Batman or his origin. And as a result, it makes his death even more tragic. And it makes you sympathize with Bruce even more. I love how Thomas Wayne is fleshed out a lot more as a character, how you have more scenes with him spending time with Bruce. And then at the same time, I love how Thomas Wayne's idea of Gotham City, his vision of what Gotham could be, is also incorporated throughout the film. And it's ultimately twisted by Roz into a form of destruction for Gotham City. Uh, and I just love how poignant that is, and how everything ties together. That if Batman doesn't stop Roz from destroying Gotham City with the very metro rail that his father created, then not only does Gotham City die, but so does his father's vision of Gotham and of what Gotham could be. I love that. That's great. I also love the fact that Bruce is more impulsive in this screenplay. You see moments where he's thinking about shooting Joe Chill at the trial, and then he's thinking about shooting a gangster later on, before he winds up going overseas. I love that. I think it's really well written, really strong, really captivating stuff. It's once he gets to the League of Shadows where everything just completely falls apart for me. The League of Shadows is not a bad idea. I like the concept of Bruce Wayne going to some mountain range in the Himalayas or in Asia somewhere, and running into some secret society of ninjas and learning the ways of the ninja and learning how to be more stealthy and learning new ways of combat. I like that. I think that's fine. It makes sense that Batman would have a lot of ninja aspects to his origin. And that is actually something that's present in the comics. In the comics, though, the origin is much more interesting, much more complex, because Bruce goes to multiple different masters of the martial arts all over the globe. And someday I would love to see that on film. Bruce going to all these different martial artists and learning all these different forms of fighting. And it would make for, in my opinion, a really cool montage. What they have initially set up here is fine. It's sound. It's the foundation of it that just does not work for me. And it's because what happens at the League of Shadows is boring. It's not captivating. It's not interesting. It's not that intriguing. The action sequences are forgettable and honestly fairly rushed, mainly because of Nolan's inexperience and also because of the fact that it just seems like he cared more about the subtext of fear and how Bruce needs to become what he fears the most in order to conquer his fears than anything else. And to me, it's not as deep or as captivating or as strong as the writers think it is. Because the first time around, okay, it's fine. The second time around, you're like, all right, I get it. You're starting to get a little repetitive. The third time around, where you have another speech from Ducard about fear, then you're like, come on, really? And then the fourth time, you're like, just shut the fuck up about fear. I get it. I understand. You don't need to over explain it to me, because once you get to that point, then it becomes the opposite of interesting. It just becomes annoying. And it also doesn't really help matters at all that Scarecrow is a part of this script. So why don't you leave some of this fear dialogue for Scarecrow? Instead of having Henry Ducard, spoilers, most people already know this, but who ultimately is Roz, instead of having Roz say all this shit about fear to Bruce, save some for Scarecrow. Because it gets to the point where you're like, what the fuck am I watching? Fear Factor? I thought I was watching Batman Begins. And because of these long, overdrawn scenes of dialogue that are just pretentious and just wordy for the sake of being wordy, and these long sequences of what feels like nothing, like even the training scenes aren't really fun to watch with Bruce training at the League of Shadows. I mean, you have a whole sequence where it seems like he's literally just standing there and stumbling around while a bunch of ninjas line dance, or they do the Macarena. They could take one step to the right, they go one step to the left. What are they gonna do? The fucking time warp? One step to the left, one step to the right. Let's do the time warp again. And it's just like, what the fuck? Ninjas just going like this, taking one step. That's not exciting. It's not a thrilling sequence. And then by the time everything goes to hell at the League of Shadows and shit's exploding, because Nolan can't direct a fight scene to save his life, there's nothing of merit there. Oh, you have the training sequence with Ducard and Bruce on the ice. It's a great visual. It looks good, but the content is nothing special. I've seen that kind of training done a million times, and honestly, I've seen it done a lot better. For instance, Mask of Zorro. You have an older master of the arts in Anthony Hopkins' character from Mask of Zorro, training a young, impulsive renegade who can't control his anger in Antonio Banderas. And the same kind of thing it goes on in the training scene on the ice. But unlike Mask of Zorro, where you saw multiple different kind of takes on this, Bruce figures it out pretty quickly. So you don't really have that many moments where he fails, maybe like once or twice, but then he's still able to figure a way to get the upper hand. So this is like the first hour or so, like over an hour of this film, and to me, it's as slow as a fucking glacier most of the time. Once he gets to the League of Shadows, it just goes downhill. And I know a lot of people find the pacing in the first half to be fine, teach their own. I think it's so slow and it's so miserable and just dull. And a big part of that is just the writing. It thinks that it's doing something really captivating and interesting, but it's not really doing much. There really is no reason for a film called Batman Begins to wait over an hour until Batman actually shows up. That being said, when Bruce goes back to Gotham City in the second half of this script, that's where things get more consistently interesting for me. I really like the way that the script handled Proto Batman. Bruce learning the tricks of the trade, learning how to incorporate different gadgets and different aspects of tech into his quest for vigilante justice. I like the bits where he's wearing a ski mask and he's being vulnerable and he's inexperienced and he's learning things on the fly. I think the way that that's handled is really well done. I think the moments between him and Lucius Fox are great. I think a lot of the back and forth with Bruce and Alfred is also really strong. Um, the moments where Bruce is trying to reconcile with Rachel, I also think are really well written. And when Roz does come back into the picture, I also think that works. The thing that doesn't work that well for me with the second half is Scarecrow. The screenwriters did a shitty job with Scarecrow because not only, in my opinion, did they have him be too young in terms of his character, they also made him incredibly weak. And in a lot of ways made him completely pointless. Why do you need the Scarecrow? Well, because he's the guy who perfects this fear formula and the gas and all of that. It's made out of a plant that Roz had at his compound in the mountains that he's very familiar with. So why do we need Scarecrow? Roz could just do that all himself. He's got enough resources. He's apparently smart enough. Why do we need Caine? Why don't we need Jonathan Caine if it's not even really set up in a way where it seems like he is really necessary to the plot? And on top of that, the character of Scarecrow and Jonathan Caine is just so poorly rendered and realized here. It's like they just have the straw, but they don't have the full Scarecrow. And there are a lot of things with this character and the way that it's written just piss me off. For instance, how he gets defeated. He doesn't even get defeated by Batman. He gets defeated by Rachel Dawes, who tases him in the face. That's just pathetic. And Scarecrow is one of my favorite Batman villains. And I had been waiting years to see Scarecrow on the big screen. And then he doesn't even wear his costume, by the way. He just wears a Scarecrow mask and a suit. So he doesn't even wear the full ensemble. And then on top of that, he fucking gets defeated in the most bitch-ass way possible. Just tased in the face. Scarecrow was Taserface before Taserface and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Thanks a lot, Nolan and Goyer. So yeah, they fucked up big time on Scarecrow. Roz, they did an alright job. I think that was fine. And like I said, I liked how they twisted Thomas Wayne's Metro Rail and turned it into a weapon of Gotham's destruction. And there are some really exciting, fun moments in the second half. The tumbler chase, I really enjoy that. Uh, there are some moments in Arkham that I thought were quite good. And yeah, there are some moments where things are a little bit wonky, mainly because of the fact that no one doesn't know how to shoot fight scenes. So I don't even know if I'm really going to blame the screenwriters for that. And yeah, at the end, Batman just kills Roz. And I'm sorry, I don't buy the bullshit some people try to pull with this. He killed him. I don't have to save you. It's like, you killed him. Like, yeah, you don't have to save him, so then you let him die. How is that any different than anything any other Batman in a Batman film has done previously? He still killed him. He killed Roz. People who say Nolan's Batman doesn't kill, I'm sorry, that's such a hypocritical thing to say. So, yeah, I mean, there are things about the second half that are really good, that are definite highlights. The stuff with Gordon before he became commissioner, I really like that as well. Uh, the moments where Bruce is playing up his playboy persona in order to keep people off the trail when it comes to his secret identity. There's also some really great lines of dialogue in this second half. I mean, you have that moment where Batman relays that quote that Rachel said to Bruce when Rachel showed up to I think showed up to Bruce's birthday party or prior to his party to give him his gift, and she told him this line of dialogue, and then Bruce uses it later on when he's in the bat suit to give Rachel the hint at his identity. And I've always liked this quote. Uh, It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me. That just fits Batman like a glove. It's such a perfect quote for Batman. And I really like it. And there are some other moments with lines of dialogue that I thought were pretty effective. Some of the speeches that Alfred would give to Bruce, the whole moments with Thomas Wayne that are showcased early on, and then also later in the film as a way to motivate Bruce, and also later on in the series with the whole bit of Bruce, why do we fall? So we can learn to pick ourselves back up. And then you have moments of dialogue that aren't really that great, like some of the attempts at humor, like nice coat, like really some of the moments where Batman's trying to be intimidating and the whole like swear to me. Like that was just kind of over the top and a little too melodramatic. But for the most part though, I think there are some really choice, really nice bits of dialogue. Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne Batman. I think Christian Bale, he's better as Bruce Wayne than he is as Batman, but I think this is the best that he's ever come across as Batman because the really deep, scratchy, gravelly voice is not really as prominent here, although it's kind of uh, there at times. But for the most part, it's pretty subdued, and I really like his portrayal of Bruce Wayne. I think he nailed the playboy aspect of him perfectly. A lot of the different nuances of Bruce. Michael Caine, I thought was a really good Alfred. It's a different take on Alfred, but I thought Michael Caine was just fantastic in that role. Liam Neeson played a great villain. Definitely intimidating, definitely menacing. I thought he was definitely a great casting choice because he brought a lot of presence to the screen. Katie Holmes, I liked her. I thought she had some good chemistry with Christian Bale, and I bought the relationship between the two, and she had a certain amount of spunk to her as well, and charisma and personality. Gary Oldman, to me, he's the quintessential Gordon on film. Like this is the way that I remember Gordon being in the comics and in the animated series, where in the Burton Batman films he was kind of useless. Here he's very useful and very integral to the plot, like it should be. Cillian Murphy, I know there are a lot of people who like his performance. I never liked his performance. I thought he was miscast as the Scarecrow. He's too young. I didn't really buy him in that role. He wasn't intimidating, he wasn't scary. And then on top of that, I just felt his acting was pretty one note and just uh, mediocre at best. He didn't really have an on-screen presence either. So that's another reason why the Scarecrow was such a fail to me in this film because of Cillian Murphy's performance. Tom Wilkinson as Carmine Falcone, I mean, he was okay, but it's just your generic mob boss. Rutger Hauer, I thought he did a great job playing a scumbag, this asshole CEO of Wayne Enterprises. He did such a good job. I wish he was in it more, and honestly, I wish he was the main mobster bad guy. Uh, Change the roles around. Have Tom Wilkinson be William Earl and have Rutger Hauer be Carmine Falcone, or change the name around and it doesn't have to be in Italian. Ken Watanabe, yeah, he's the decoy. Roz, a really forgettable, nothing performance. Morgan Freeman, marvelous, loved him as Lucius Fox. He also had some really good chemistry and dynamic with Christian Bale. And then we get to some of the other technical aspects of the film. The cinematography by Wally Feister. I think I said, I don't think I pronounced the name correctly. Uh, just wonderful. He's a phenomenal cinematographer, and this is no exception. I often wonder where Nolan would be visually without Wally by his side. He was initially tasked with creating a very Blade Runner-esque look for the film, especially for Gotham City. It's always rainy and always gritty and grainy, and I felt that he nailed it. Ultimately, I prefer Anton Furst's more stylized take on Gotham City from the Burton Batman films, but I still feel that there is a lot of merit to Wally's take on Gotham. And then you have some really excellent editing by Lee Smith, except during the fight scenes, which I blame Nolan more for. I think maybe the editor was trying to compensate for the fact that Nolan doesn't know what he's doing in that regard, so he had to try to cover it up the best he could. The music by Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard. I know there are a lot of people who think this is one of the best scores ever. I'm not one of them. I think the main theme is good. The thumping main track that Zimmer really focuses on throughout the score. It's definitely memorable. It definitely gets your blood pumping. But the other parts of the score to me are pretty forgettable, except for maybe one or two notes here or there. I think overall, Hans Zimmer has done a lot better. I think this is a little overrated in terms of his scores. I think he's done much better work in films like Backdraft, for instance, or Broken Arrow, than in Batman Begins. Because other than the dun, 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 like, other than that, like, what is really that memorable about this score? And when it comes to some other aspects of the film, I love the fact that Nolan did a lot of practical work here in terms of the direction. And also, he was very integral into why the film featured as much miniatures as it does. A lot of Gotham City at the end and the Metro Rail, that's all miniatures, that's all model work, which at the time was something you didn't see that much of. So it was really cool to see. And the bat suit, I think it's a little uh, clunky, a little chunky looking. I've never really been a big fan of the design of the bat suit, and it just seems like for all the hype about how it has better movement in terms of the range of the kind of things that an actor can do inside the suit, you don't really see much of it on the screen because a lot of the fight scenes are just quick cuts and shaky cam. So it just seems like a whole pointless affair. And from a visual aesthetic standpoint, it just doesn't really look that good. I've never really cared for the design of the bat suit in these movies. It just looks chunky to me. And then on top of that, you can barely even see the bat symbol. The tumbler, for a different kind of more realistic, less stylized take on the Batmobile, I didn't mind it. I can understand why people aren't fans of it, but I thought it was okay. And it is a film that is a little too long. It did not need to be 140 minutes. Like I said, if you just cut out a good chunk of the dialogue in the first half of the film, this would be a much better paced movie, and to me, ultimately a better film overall. You did not need to have what felt like 50 different renditions of the subtext that's centering around fear. That was not needed. And if you were going to have a lot of sequences at the League of Shadows, then make the scenes more interesting or exciting to watch instead of just some really boring, just lackluster sequences where it doesn't really seem like there's much of anything remotely enjoyable or captivating going on. So, yeah, Batman Begins is a film that ultimately I like, but I don't love. But anyway, that's my long, uh, in-depth, and kind of scattered review of Batman Begins. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.